Imagine waking up before dawn, your body aching from yesterday's endless march, every muscle stiff and sore. You sling a heavy pack onto your shoulders, almost 20 kilograms of gear, including a Springfield musket, ammunition, a bayonet, a canteen, food, and a woolen blanket. The weight digs into your skin as sweat beads and soaks through your rough wool uniform. This is not a scene from a movie. It was the daily reality for soldiers fighting in the American Civil War. Life as a Civil War soldier was far from glamorous. Beyond the battles and heroic charges, there were long, grueling marches under scorching sun or pouring rain, nights spent shivering in damp tents, and the constant struggle to stay healthy amid disease and exhaustion. Each day tested their physical endurance and mental strength. Blisters, chafing, hunger, and the ever-present threat of injury or illness were part of their routine. The grind was relentless. Soldiers carried heavy weapons and supplies that slowed their pace but were essential for survival. They learned to move in tight formations, drill repeatedly, and respond instantly to commands. Yet, outside of battle, much of their time was spent performing chores, setting up camps, standing guard, cooking sparse meals, and writing letters home when they could. These small moments of normalcy offered brief relief from the harsh realities surrounding them. Imagine the ache of missing home, the worry for family, and the fear that any day might be their last. Many soldiers suffered silently from wounds and sickness, with medical care often scarce and overwhelmed. The emotional toll was as heavy as the physical burden. This story is not just about war. It is about human resilience, the quiet courage to keep going when the odds are stacked against you. It is a glimpse into the lived experience of those who shaped history with sweat, sacrifice, and determination. If you want to explore more stories like this, uncovering the untold realities behind historical events, please like this video and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us bring these stories to life. Drop a comment below to share where you are watching from. We would love to hear from you. Stay with us as we step into the worn boots of a Civil War soldier and experience what life was really like on the front lines and behind the scenes. This is a journey through hardship, hope, and history you won't want to miss. Carrying nearly 20 kilograms of gear was a constant, grueling part of a Civil War soldier's life, a burden that weighed not only on their shoulders but also on their spirit. The centerpiece of this load was the Springfield musket, a heavy 10-pound weapon that demanded strength and endurance just to hold and maneuver, let alone fire accurately under pressure. Crafted from wood and steel, it was a symbol of both survival and danger, an ever-present companion through endless marches, restless nights, and terrifying battles. This musket was not a mere tool. It was an extension of the soldier himself, shaping his movements, his tactics, and his very sense of being in the chaos of war. Alongside the musket came a cartridge box filled with dozens of rounds of ammunition, each bullet a fragile chance between life and death. The box hung from a leather strap, constantly shifting with every step, reminding the soldier that every trigger pull might be the one that saved his life or ended it. Close by was the bayonet, a cruel blade designed for brutal, close combat. Strapped to the musket's end, it represented the grim reality that sometimes battles were fought not from afar with gunfire, but up close and personal, in muddy trenches or dense forests, where the noise of the fight was deafening, and the fear even more so. But the soldier's burden did not end there. Slung over his shoulder or strapped tightly to his back was a canteen, often half empty or filled with murky water from nearby streams. The quest for clean water was a constant struggle, and dehydration could weaken even the toughest men. Hunger gnawed at their bellies, and in their sack simple rations like hardtack and dry, tough biscuit and salted pork offered little comfort or nutrition. These meager provisions were vital, yet far from satisfying, and many a soldier longed for the warm meals and fresh bread they once took for granted at home. Wrapping all this together was the rough wool blanket, essential for the bitter cold nights spent under the open sky or in cramped, damp tents. Wool was heavy and coarse against the skin, often causing painful chafing. But it was one of the few protections from the biting cold, rain, and sometimes snow. Soldiers quickly learned that every item in their kit had a purpose. None was superfluous. Yet the cumulative weight pressed on them relentlessly, making every mile marched feel longer, every step more taxing. The physical challenge of carrying such a load day after day cannot be overstated. Each morning, as the sun rose, soldiers struggled to hoist their gear onto tired bodies, aching from the previous day's exertions. Their boots, worn and muddy, trudged through fields, forests, and rocky terrain, while the hot sun or pouring rain soaked them through. Sweat soaked their uniforms, blending with dust and grime, turning clothes into heavy, uncomfortable armor that rubbed raw skin until blisters formed and sores festered. But beyond the physical toll, the weight symbolized the heavy responsibilities each soldier bore, the duty to his comrades, the hope for survival, and the grim necessity of combat. The musket, ammunition, bayonet, food, and blanket were not just items. They were lifelines, tools of endurance in a relentless struggle. Soldiers had to master the art of balancing speed with caution, learning to move swiftly despite the burden, to respond instantly when called to battle, and to preserve their energy for when it mattered most. Training turned these men, many of whom were farmers, laborers, or tradesmen, into disciplined units capable of marching for miles, assembling in formation, and firing volleys with deadly precision. Yet the harshness of their equipment served as a constant reminder that war was a test of both body and mind. The clinking of cartridge boxes, the weight of the musket resting against a shoulder, the cold steel of the bayonet. These sounds and sensations filled their waking moments and haunted their dreams. In moments of rest, when the regiment finally made camp after a long day's march, soldiers would slowly shed their burdens, their shoulders aching as the gear was set down. The musket was cleaned and inspected, the bayonet sharpened and checked for rust. Food was prepared as best as possible over open fires, though often it was barely enough to stave off hunger. The blanket was carefully folded or spread beneath them as they sought sleep, knowing that soon the weight of the day would return once more with the dawn. Yet, despite the hardship, there was a strange bond forged through this shared burden. Soldiers understood that every piece of equipment was a link in the chain of survival. Losing a cartridge box or a bayonet could mean the difference between life and death in battle. The weight on their backs was also a weight on their hearts, the weight of responsibility to their fellow men, to the cause they fought for, and to the families waiting anxiously far away. This burden was not just physical, it carried the hopes and fears of thousands. It was the heavy silence in the moments before battle, the anxious tightening of muscles as orders were barked, the slow, steady march toward danger, despite exhaustion. Every step, every breath, every movement with that gear was a testament to resilience, endurance, and an unyielding will to survive. In carrying their muskets, ammunition, bayonets, food, and blankets, these soldiers carried the essence of the Civil War itself, the brutal reality hidden behind the tales of glory and honor. Their stories remind us that behind every historic battle and every famous general, there were countless individuals weighed down by the tangible heaviness of war, yet still moving forward through pain, fear, and uncertainty. Understanding this burden helps us appreciate the profound sacrifices made, not just on the battlefield, but in every step taken toward it. It transforms the distant echoes of history into a vivid human experience, one of courage shaped by the relentless weight of duty and survival. The life of a Civil War soldier was defined not only by the battles that punctuated the conflict, but by the unending rhythm of the routine that stretched between them, a routine marked by long, grueling marches that tested the limits of endurance, the careful setting up of camp under watchful eyes, the constant maintenance of defensive positions, and the ever-present scarcity of personal comfort that gnawed away at both body and spirit. Each day began before the sun had risen, the bugle's call stirring the soldiers from their restless slumber beneath threadbare blankets or in cramped tents that offered little protection from the cold and damp. As they pulled on their worn boots and slung their heavy packs over aching shoulders, the weight of their equipment and the miles ahead settled firmly in their minds, mingling with the uncertainty of what the day might bring. Marching was the backbone of a soldier's existence. The terrain was rarely forgiving, shifting from dusty roads baked by the summer sun to muddy fields slick with rain, steep hills, and dense forests that swallowed sound and shadow alike. The pace was relentless, a steady trudge that demanded focus and discipline, with little room for complaint. The heavy muskets and cartridge boxes clattered against tired bodies. The bayonets jingled with each step, and the canteens swung like pendulums, occasionally offering a precious sip of water to soothe parched throats. Marching was more than physical exertion. It was a mental battle to keep moving forward when blisters burned and legs ached, when hunger gnawed, and when the mind longed for the comforts of home. There was a strange camaraderie in these long treks, a shared struggle that bound the men together as they marched in close formation, their faces etched with determination and fatigue. Arriving at the end of a march did not mean rest, but rather the beginning of a new set of challenges. Setting up camp was a carefully choreographed operation carried out with military precision, even as exhaustion weighed heavily on every soldier. Companies dispersed into assigned areas, swiftly securing the perimeter to guard against enemy surprise attacks, their eyes scanning the tree lines and fields as they erected makeshift defenses. Tents were pitched, often on uneven or muddy ground, and fires were kindled with whatever dry wood could be found, the smoke curling upward as a faint beacon in the twilight. The crackling of the flames was a small comfort amid the shadows, providing warmth and a place to cook whatever meager rations were available. Despite these efforts, personal comfort was a luxury rarely afforded. The hard ground offered little respite for aching backs, the cold seeped into bones, and the ever-present threat of enemy scouts kept nerves taut. Maintaining defensive positions was a constant necessity, a task that could not be neglected even in moments of apparent calm. Soldiers dug shallow rifle pits and built crude barricades from fallen timber and stones, their hands raw and blistered from the relentless labor. These fortifications were rarely elaborate, but served as vital protection in the face of sudden enemy advances. Guard duty was assigned in rotations, with each soldier taking turns, watching over the camp through the long, eerie hours of the night. The stillness was broken only by the occasional crack of a twig, the distant hoot of an owl, or the low murmur of whispered conversations meant to soothe frayed nerves. Sleep was fitful and fleeting, haunted by the memories of battles past and the anticipation of those yet to come. The scarcity of personal comfort extended beyond physical hardships to the emotional realm. Letters from home were treasured possessions, carefully folded and reread by flickering candlelight, carrying news of births, losses, and the mundane details of life, far removed from the smoke and blood of war. Food was simple, and often insufficient hardtack biscuits that were dry and tasteless, salted pork that was greasy and difficult to chew, and coffee so weak it barely masked the bitterness of fatigue. Yet these small routines, the shared meal, the cleaning of weapons, the tending to wounds, and the brief moments of camaraderie around the fire were lifelines that sustained morale and reminded soldiers of their humanity amid the chaos. Throughout it all, the soldiers remained ever vigilant, understanding that the fragile peace of camp could be shattered at any moment by the sound of bugles signaling an enemy approach or the sudden command to advance. Their days were filled with a mixture of monotonous labor and sudden bursts of intense activity, a cycle that drained their bodies and sharpened their senses. The weight of duty pressed upon them as heavily as their gear, a reminder that each day survived was a victory in itself, a step closer to the hope of returning home. This routine, exhausting and unforgiving as it was forged a resilience that would define the soldier's experience. It was within these repetitive marches, the hurried setting of camp, the digging of trenches, and the scarcity of comfort that the true nature of a Civil War soldier's life revealed itself not in the glory of battle alone, but in the relentless persistence to endure, to adapt, and to face each new dawn with courage. Despite the hardship, the stories born from this routine are a testament to human endurance and the quiet strength found in the bonds between men who carried the weight of war together, marching through history with heavy steps and heavier hearts. Amid the relentless marches, the exhausting routines, and the ever-present weight of their gear, another invisible enemy plagued the soldiers just as fiercely as the battles themselves, disease and injury. Relentless and unforgiving, claiming far more lives than bullets or bayonets ever could. It was not uncommon for men like Samuel, once strong and hopeful, to find themselves slowly succumbing to ailments that spread through the camps with terrifying ease. Pneumonia, dysentery, typhoid fever. These were the silent killers stalking the ranks, thriving in the cramped tents, muddy fields, and unsanitary conditions that defined much of a soldier's existence. Samuel's cough, a harsh, rattling sound that grew worse with each passing day, was more than just an annoyance. It was a death sentence in slow motion. His breathing became labored, his skin flushed with fever, and yet the medical care available was woefully insufficient. The regimental surgeon, often overwhelmed with hundreds of wounded and sick men, had little time or resources to devote to each individual case. Field hospitals, when they existed, were scenes of organized chaos where surgeons worked tirelessly but with limited supplies, performing desperate surgeries by candlelight and doing what they could. With the knowledge and tools of the time, the soldiers quickly learned to fear not just the battlefield, but the hospital tents as well. Wounded men who were lucky enough to survive the initial fight often faced a new nightmare: infection, gangrene, and the agonizing uncertainty of whether they would be cared for adequately or left to suffer. Amputations were common, often performed without anesthesia, and the risk of death from infection was high. Medical techniques were rudimentary, and antibiotics were still decades away, leaving even minor wounds dangerously prone to complications. In Samuel's case, his pneumonia likely started as a chill, a common occurrence after nights spent in wet clothing and cold, drafty tents. But the infection deepened, tightening his chest and stealing his breath. His comrades noticed his weakening condition, the way he struggled to keep pace during marches, and the haunting rattle in his lungs. They knew that unless something changed, Samuel might not survive to see another sunrise. The regimental surgeon, a grim-faced man burdened with the impossible task of caring for so many, made his rounds with a weary professionalism. He listened to Samuel's chest with a stethoscope, his face unreadable, but his eyes betraying the grim reality. There was little he could do in the field beyond offering rest and basic care, and the lieutenant's order to keep Samuel near the rear was as much a recognition of the soldier's fragility as it was a practical measure for the regiment's movement. Despite the scarcity of medical resources, soldiers tried to support each other in small ways. They shared what little medicine they had, offered comfort and encouragement, and carried their wounded comrades when possible. The bonds forged in such hardship were strong, grounded in shared suffering, and a collective will to survive. Yet, even with this solidarity, the toll of disease was devastating. Entire units could be decimated not by enemy fire, but by outbreaks of illness that spread unchecked through the crowded camps. Sanitation was a constant challenge. Latrines were often makeshift and poorly maintained, contaminating nearby water sources and spreading deadly bacteria. Clean water was scarce, and drinking from creeks or stagnant pools was a risk many had to take. The lack of proper nutrition, combined with exhaustion and exposure to the elements, left soldiers vulnerable to infection and slowed recovery. Medical knowledge of germ theory was limited, and many soldiers and officers simply accepted sickness as an inevitable part of their fate. Samuel's worsening condition was a stark reminder of these brutal realities. As his breath grew shorter and his strength faded, the emotional weight on his comrades increased. They were faced with the helplessness of watching a friend fade away, knowing that no heroic charge or tactical maneuver could save him now. His whispered request to ensure his wife received his belongings was a poignant moment, highlighting the personal losses behind the grand narrative of war. The fear of disease shaped many decisions on the battlefield and in camp. Officers tried to maintain discipline not only to prepare for combat, but to enforce cleanliness and prevent outbreaks. Yet, the demands of constant movement and combat often made strict sanitation impossible. Soldiers dug trenches and fortified positions with tired hands, but the enemy of sickness lurked just as persistently as the enemy's bullets. Medical staff worked tirelessly under horrific conditions, often risking their own health. The image of surgeons stained with blood, moving mechanically from patient to patient, is etched into the history of the war. Their efforts, though heroic, were constrained by the era's limited technology and understanding. The stories of survival are often intertwined with tales of loss of men who endured the horrors of battle only to be claimed by fever or infection days later. For the men on the front lines, this invisible war was fought alongside the visible one. Every cough, every fever, every aching joint was a reminder that danger was not confined to the battlefield. The struggle for survival extended beyond enemy lines, to the very fabric of their daily lives. Samuel's story, though just one among thousands, captures the profound vulnerability of soldiers, caught between the fury of combat and the merciless spread of disease. In reflecting on these hardships, we gain a deeper understanding of what it truly meant to be a Civil War soldier. The physical and emotional endurance required was immense, and the presence of illness and injury added a cruel dimension to an already brutal existence. It is a testament to their resilience that so many survived, and a solemn reminder of the human cost of war. This harsh reality compels us to look beyond tales of glory and strategy, to remember the individuals who bore not only the visible wounds of battle, but the hidden scars of sickness and suffering. Through stories like Samuel's, the history of the Civil War becomes not just a record of conflict, but a powerful narrative of endurance, sacrifice, and the fragile nature of life in the midst of chaos. The weight of war pressed not only on the bodies of Civil War soldiers, but deeply into their minds and hearts, where the quiet battles of fear, uncertainty, and homesickness raged with equal ferocity. As the regiment marched through fields and forests, every step was shadowed by the unknown, a looming sense of danger that clung to them like the heavy packs on their backs. The uncertainty of what lay ahead in battle was a constant companion, weaving anxiety into the fabric of each day, making it difficult to find moments of peace or rest. Soldiers faced the brutal reality that any order could thrust them into a hailstorm of bullets or a desperate charge, and the line between life and death was often thinner than a breath. Amid this turmoil, homesickness settled like a quiet ache beneath the roar of war. Letters from loved ones, carefully folded and treasured, were lifelines to a world that felt increasingly distant and unreal. The scent of familiar places, the faces of family, and the warmth of home became both comfort and torment reminders of what was lost and what might never be regained. Many soldiers carried these memories silently, their thoughts drifting to small moments like a sister's lost tooth or the simple pleasure of a shared meal around the family table, while the harsh sounds of battle echoed close at hand. Mental strain took many forms. Some soldiers grappled with fear so raw it paralyzed their actions, while others buried their anxieties beneath a stoic facade or dark humor shared around campfires. Sleep was elusive, disturbed by the echoes of past skirmishes or the anticipation of future fights. Nighttime brought vivid dreams and nightmares, where the line between memory and imagination blurred, leaving men to wake in cold sweat, clutching their blankets and muskets. The toll on morale was profound, and yet, amid this internal chaos, bonds of brotherhood offered moments of reprieve. The shared experience of hardship created a fragile community where a few words, a knowing glance, or a quiet moment of companionship helped carry the weight of despair. Uncertainty about the future was another invisible enemy. Orders could change without warning, plans made and remade as intelligence shifted. Soldiers were often kept in the dark about larger strategies, left to speculate on the outcome and the cost. This lack of control bred a simmering anxiety as men tried to reconcile their sense of duty with the randomness of survival. The unpredictability of battle, where courage and luck intertwined, made each engagement both terrifying and surreal. The fear of injury or death was ever present, yet many pressed forward, fueled by a mixture of resolve, duty, and the desire to protect their comrades. The mental burdens were compounded by the physical hardships already endured. Exhaustion dulled the mind even as it sharpened survival instincts. Soldiers learned to suppress their fears, to focus on the immediate tasks, marching, digging, firing, as a way to stave off despair. Yet beneath the discipline, the human vulnerability remained. Letters home often concealed the true depth of suffering, presenting brave faces to worried families. In quiet moments, men wrestled with guilt, survivor's guilt, grief for fallen friends, and the burden of carrying on in the face of overwhelming odds. Samuel's story reflects this silent struggle. As his illness worsened, so too did the emotional weight on those around him. His whispered requests, the concern etched on his comrades' faces, and the unspoken fears all spoke to the mental and emotional toll of war. The thought of leaving loved ones behind, of never returning to the familiar comforts of home, added a layer of sorrow that words often failed to express. These personal losses were woven into the larger tapestry of conflict, reminding us that war is as much a battle of the mind as it is of muskets and bayonets. Despite the hardships, moments of hope and resilience punctuated the daily grind. Shared stories, songs, and small acts of kindness provided brief escapes from the grim reality. Soldiers found strength in their faith, in the bonds with fellow men, and in the belief that their sacrifice had meaning beyond the immediate suffering. These flickers of light in the darkness helped sustain morale and allowed many to endure far longer than they might have imagined. Understanding the mental and emotional landscape of these soldiers deepens our appreciation for their experience. It reveals a dimension of war often overshadowed by strategy and combat, a world of internal conflict, longing, and courage that shaped the lives of those who fought. It reminds us that behind every historical event are individuals grappling with fear and hope, despair and determination, separated from home but bound by a shared struggle to survive and to find meaning amid chaos. As we reflect on this, we gain a fuller picture of what it meant to be a Civil War soldier, not just the visible trials of battle and march, but the invisible wounds borne quietly within. These stories of mental strain and homesickness enrich the human narrative of the war, honoring the resilience of those who faced the unknown with heavy hearts but steadfast spirits. As the regiment moved steadily through the rolling fields and dense patches of forest, the soldiers learned quickly that the war was not only fought on grand battlefields, but also in sudden, unpredictable moments that shattered any semblance of calm. The quiet routine of marching, setting up camp, and preparing defenses could be disrupted in an instant by the sharp crack of a twig, the distant clatter of horse hooves, or the shadowy figures glimpsed through the trees. These unexpected skirmishes with enemy scouts brought tension that rippled through the ranks like electricity, forcing every man to be alert and ready for combat at a moment's notice. One evening, as the sun began to dip below the horizon, casting long shadows across the dusty road, the regiment came to a sudden halt. Word passed swiftly along the column that Confederate scouts had been spotted less than a mile ahead, their presence confirmed by the faint sound of horses moving cautiously through the forest to the left. The air, heavy with the smells of smoke and sweat, seemed to tighten around the men as officers barked orders to prepare defensive positions, their voices sharp and urgent. The usual exhaustion that settled in after a day's march vanished instantly, replaced by a heightened state of readiness that made every heartbeat pound like a drum. The soldiers, some still nursing aching limbs from the march, moved with practiced efficiency born from months of drilling and hard experience. Rifles were raised and aimed instinctively toward the darkened tree line, where flickers of muzzle flashes betrayed the enemy's position. The tension was palpable as the blue line steadied itself, each man aware that the slightest noise or misstep could give away their position or invite disaster. Samuel, whose pneumonia had been steadily worsening but who remained determined to stand with his comrades, quietly shifted into a firing position, his rifle trained on the sounds in the darkness. Around him, other soldiers mirrored his movements, faces set in grim resolve despite the fear simmering beneath. The first volley erupted in a thunderous roar, rifles firing almost as one, the recoil jolting shoulders and filling the night air with smoke and the sharp scent of gunpowder. The skirmish was brief but intense, a sudden clash of wills in the shadowy woods where visibility was limited and danger lurked in every corner. Commands to halt, fall back, and regroup echoed through the darkness as the regiment executed a careful withdrawal to more defensible positions. Retreat, a maneuver fraught with peril because it exposed backs to the enemy and risked breaking the line, was carried out with discipline born of experience and necessity. Throughout the skirmish, the soldiers' senses sharpened. Every sound amplified the crack of a branch, the rustle of leaves, the distant shout of an officer. The once familiar landscape transformed into a maze of threats, where even the smallest mistake could be fatal. The night stretched long, punctuated by intermittent gunfire, and the watchful eyes of men scanning the shadows. Sleep was a distant memory as the soldiers rotated guard duty, their vigilance unwavering, despite exhaustion and the lingering fear of what the next dawn might bring. These surprise encounters with enemy scouts were more than mere irritations. They were vital moments of reconnaissance and psychological warfare, testing the nerve and readiness of the men while providing crucial intelligence to commanders on both sides. For the soldiers on the ground, they were reminders that danger was never far, that the war's reach extended beyond the pitched battles, into the very fabric of their daily lives. Every sudden skirmish reaffirmed the necessity of discipline, cohesion, and quick reaction, traits that could mean the difference between survival and disaster. The tension of these moments was a sharp contrast to the relative monotony of the routine marches in camp life, injecting adrenaline and fear in equal measure. Soldiers learned to live with this unpredictability, balancing the weariness of their bodies with the constant mental alertness demanded by the ever-present threat of attack. For many, the adrenaline rush of these engagements was a grim reminder that war was not a distant concept but a living, breathing reality that could explode into violence without warning. As dawn approached and the skirmish wound down, the regiment settled into a cautious watchfulness, aware that this encounter was just one of many in the protracted struggle that defined the conflict. The men exchanged quiet words, tending to the wounded, and sharing a sense of relief tempered by the knowledge that the war was far from over. Samuel, despite his failing health, remained among them, a symbol of perseverance amid uncertainty and hardship. These unexpected skirmishes shaped not only the tactical landscape of the war, but also the daily experience of the soldiers, forging resilience and sharpening instincts that would serve them in the battles to come. They illustrated how the war extended beyond grand strategies and famous clashes to the unpredictable, dangerous moments that tested every soldier's courage and readiness. Through these encounters, the reality of war, the fear, the tension, the necessity for swift action became unmistakably clear, weaving a complex narrative of conflict that was as much about survival as it was about victory. The moment the first volley erupted was unlike anything many of the soldiers had ever experienced. Despite months of rigorous drilling and endless practice on the parade ground, the sharp crack of rifles firing in unison, the thunderous roar that echoed across the fields, and the acrid smell of gunpowder suddenly transformed their mechanical drills into a deadly, chaotic reality. For men like Samuel and his comrades, the transition from controlled training to the raw terror of combat was both sudden and overwhelming, forcing them to confront the stark difference between theory and experience. When the command rang out, ready, aim, fire, muscles moved automatically, hands gripping rifles with a familiarity born of repetition. But the sights, sounds, and smells of battle created a sensory assault that no drill could replicate. The recoil of the Springfield musket jolted shoulders with every shot, each blast a violent punctuation in the tense silence that had preceded it. Smoke swirled thickly through the trees, obscuring vision and turning the world into a haze of shadow and noise, where the faces of friends and foes alike flickered in and out of sight like ghosts. Fear was a constant undercurrent, though it was often masked beneath layers of training and discipline. The reality of standing shoulder to shoulder with men who might fall beside you at any moment was a heavy weight on the soul. The sharp crack of a rifle, the sudden cry of pain, the staggering figure of a wounded comrade. All these sights and sounds made it clear that this was no longer a controlled exercise, but a fight for survival. Even the most seasoned soldiers felt the adrenaline surge, their hearts pounding as they struggled to maintain composure and focus. The regiment's first engagement was a baptism by fire, a brutal initiation that tested every lesson learned and every instinct honed in camp. Orders flowed rapidly: fire, reload, fall back, and the men responded with a mixture of practiced precision and raw urgency. Each command was a lifeline, a structure amid the chaos. But the unpredictable nature of combat meant that no plan could fully prepare them for what unfolded. The smoke, the shouting, and the deafening noise created an environment where senses could betray as easily as they guided. In this maelstrom, individual experiences varied widely. Some soldiers froze in fear, unable to pull the trigger despite the threat just yards away, while others reacted with a fierce determination, their bodies moving faster than their minds could process. The disconnect between training to kill and actually doing it was profound. Many recalled their first moments aiming down, the rifle sights, seeing the face of an enemy soldier, often a young man not much older than themselves, and the surreal sense that time slowed as they pulled the trigger. It was a moment both horrifying and defining, an irreversible step into the grim realities of war. The regiment's volley was met with a fierce response, the Confederate line returning fire with equal intensity. The ground shook with the impact of bullets and shells, and the air filled with cries of pain, orders, and the relentless sound of musket fire. The men clung to their positions, firing and reloading in a deadly rhythm that blurred into a continuous cacophony. The fear of the unknown, the unpredictability of who would fall next, was tempered by the necessity to act, to survive, and to protect comrades. Retreating under fire was among the most harrowing experiences. To fall back meant turning your back on the enemy, risking exposure and chaos in a moment when discipline was paramount. Yet, executed with precision, it was a maneuver that saved lives and preserved the fighting strength of the regiment. The soldiers moved backward while continuing to fire, their bodies tense with the knowledge that any misstep could be fatal. This delicate balance between aggression and caution was a hallmark of their early combat experiences. The physical toll of that first engagement was immense. Shoulders ached from the recoil, arms burned from repeated loading, and lungs filled with smoke and dust. Yet, the mental toll was even heavier. The sights of fallen friends, the sounds of suffering, and the overwhelming noise imprinted themselves on memories that would haunt many long after the guns fell silent. The camaraderie forged in these moments was tempered by the shared trauma, a silent understanding among the men that none would emerge unchanged. Amid the chaos, leadership played a crucial role. Officers and sergeants shouted orders, moved among the men, and tried to maintain order and morale. Their voices were beacons in the storm, guiding the regiment through the confusion and terror. Yet, many officers themselves were inexperienced, promoted from the ranks with little formal training, learning leadership under fire. The weight of command in such moments was immense, and mistakes could be costly, yet their resolve often inspired the men to hold their ground. For Samuel and others, The first taste of combat marked a turning point. The theoretical knowledge and drills gave way to the stark reality that survival depended on a mixture of training, instinct, luck, and sheer willpower. Each man carried not only his rifle and gear, but also the invisible burden of fear and responsibility. The battlefield was a place where every decision, every movement, could mean life or death. In the aftermath, as smoke cleared and the sounds of battle receded, the men gathered their wounded and regrouped, their faces etched with exhaustion and shock. The cost was visible in the empty spaces where comrades had fallen, and in the haunted eyes of those who survived. Yet even in this grim aftermath, there was a quiet resolve to continue, a determination to face whatever lay ahead, with the strength forged in the crucible of that first deadly volley. This baptism by fire was more than a moment in battle. It was the moment when soldiers truly became warriors. It was a brutal education that no drill could provide, and a test of the human spirit in the face of unimaginable danger. Through these overwhelming first experiences, the regiment was transformed, bound together by shared sacrifice and a hardened resolve to endure the trials yet to come. Retreating under fire was one of the most perilous and delicate maneuvers a Civil War soldier could face, demanding not only physical endurance, but an extraordinary level of discipline and coordination to prevent the collapse of the entire formation. Unlike the controlled environments of training grounds where soldiers practiced marching and firing in unison, the battlefield introduced chaos and unpredictability that could turn a retreat into a devastating rout if not executed with precision and calm under pressure. The danger was not simply from the enemy's bullets raining down during withdrawal, but from the very human instinct to panic when turning away from danger, a moment when cohesion could break, leaving men vulnerable and isolated. The order to fall back was always accompanied by a palpable tension, as every soldier understood the risks involved. To retreat meant moving backward toward relative safety while maintaining the ability to fire on the advancing enemy, all without breaking ranks or giving in to fear. This required a careful balance between urgency and control, a task made more difficult by the exhaustion from hours of marching, the stress of battle, and the ever-present fear of what lay beyond the next tree line or ridge. The soldiers' training, drilled into them over long months, became a lifeline in these moments, their practice movements providing structure amid the chaos. As the command to withdraw echoed along the line, men began stepping backward cautiously, keeping their rifles raised and ready to fire. Their eyes scanned the battlefield, alert for enemy movements and for comrades struggling to keep pace. The slightest hesitation or misstep could cause a ripple of confusion, leading to gaps in the line that enemy sharpshooters or cavalry could exploit. Officers and non-commissioned officers moved swiftly among the troops, shouting encouragement and issuing precise orders to keep the formation intact. Their leadership was crucial, providing the steady hand needed to guide men through one of the most dangerous moments in combat. The physical challenge of retreating under fire was immense. Soldiers had to control their movements carefully, avoiding stumbles or falls that could spell disaster when bullets were flying. The uneven ground, muddy fields, rocky paths, and thick underbrush added to the difficulty, while the weight of their gear slowed their pace and sapped their strength. Many recalled how the recoil of their muskets, the tight grip on their bayonets, and the constant vigilance drained every ounce of energy, making each step backward feel like climbing an invisible mountain. Fear was a constant companion, yet it was tempered by the understanding that discipline was their best defense. Soldiers drew strength from the presence of those beside them, the shared responsibility to protect one another, even as they moved away from immediate danger. The bonds forged in camp and on the march were tested in these moments, as men watched each other's backs and offered quiet reassurances through a nod or a steadying hand. Panic, once it took hold, could spread like wildfire. But where discipline held firm, the regiment moved as a cohesive unit even while retreating. The chaos that accompanied many retreats on Civil War battlefields offers a stark contrast to the ideal of a disciplined withdrawal. In the fog of war, confusion, injury, and exhaustion could combine to break lines and scatter troops. Yet, regiments that managed to hold their nerve and maintain order during retreat often saved countless lives and preserved their fighting capability for the battles still to come. The stories of these moments reveal the fine line between survival and disaster, where courage was measured not only in charges forward, but in the controlled step back. Samuel's company experienced this firsthand during a fierce skirmish. As the order to fall back was given, the men began their withdrawal, their rifles raised, and their movements deliberate. The sharp bark of commands from officers kept the line from faltering, even as bullets whistled past and the ground shook with the impact of artillery shells. Some soldiers stumbled, their faces pale with fear, but the steady presence of sergeants and lieutenants helped pull them back into formation. It was a dance of survival, where every movement was critical and every second counted. The retreat was not only a test of physical endurance, but of mental resilience. Soldiers wrestled with the shame that sometimes accompanied withdrawal, the fear that they had failed, or that comrades had been left behind. Yet many understood that retreat was not defeat, but a strategic necessity, a way to regroup and fight another day. The ability to fall back in good order was a mark of a seasoned and disciplined unit, and those who mastered it gained an edge over less organized foes. As the regiment completed its withdrawal and established a new defensive position, the mood shifted from immediate terror to sober reflection. The men tended to the wounded, checked their gear, and prepared for the possibility of renewed combat. The retreat had been a harrowing ordeal, but it was also a testament to their training and resolve. In these moments, the soldiers learned that survival in war depended as much on discipline and teamwork as on courage and firepower. The lessons of retreating under fire echoed throughout the campaign. Officers emphasized drills that simulated withdrawal maneuvers, teaching men to control their fear and maintain formation even under pressure. Veterans shared stories of near disasters turned to triumphs by steadfast discipline, reinforcing the importance of calm and order in the face of chaos. These experiences shaped not only the tactics of the regiment, but the character of the soldiers themselves, forging a resilience that would carry them through many more trials. Through the smoke and confusion, the retreat was a powerful reminder that war was not a series of glorious charges alone, but a complex struggle requiring patience, strategy, and the quiet strength to live another day. It revealed the human dimension of battle, where fear and discipline collided, and where the true test of a soldier was not just in the heat of attack, but in the courage to withdraw with honor and purpose. The moment a wounded soldier was carried off the battlefield, he entered a world unlike any other, the chaotic and grim reality of the field hospital, where survival often depended as much on luck as on skill and care. Unlike the structured life of the camp or the intense moments of battle, the hospital was a place of constant motion, raw emotion, and stark contrasts. Tents stretched across clearings, hastily erected to shelter rows of wounded men, their faces pale and eyes glazed with pain or shock. The air was thick with the mingled scents of blood, antiseptic, sweat, and unwashed bodies, creating an atmosphere both overwhelming and unyielding. Surgeons, like Dr. Morris, moved through this grim landscape with a heavy sense of duty, their faces lined with fatigue and their hands stained by the endless toil of saving lives under impossible conditions. There were men who had seen too much suffering, their expertise often stretched thin by the sheer number of casualties that poured in after each engagement. Theirs was a brutal work, cutting through torn flesh and shattered bones with practiced precision but limited tools, all while knowing that infection and disease lurked as constant threats. Amputations were common, performed swiftly, and often without the benefit of proper anesthesia, a grim testament to the medical realities of the time. The wounded arrived in various states, some barely conscious, others screaming in agony, many silently enduring the shock of injury and loss. Orderlies and assistants moved quickly, carrying stretchers, applying bandages, and trying to maintain some semblance of calm amid the cacophony. The cries of pain mixed with shouted commands, the clatter of surgical instruments, and the groans of the injured, creating a relentless symphony of human suffering. Yet, beneath this chaos, there was a solemn determination to save as many lives as possible, a fragile hope that each soldier could be pulled back from the edge. Samuel's worsening pneumonia was a different kind of battle waged within these tents, one less visible but no less deadly. The regimental surgeon's attention was often pulled toward the more immediate trauma of gunshot wounds and shattered limbs, leaving illnesses like pneumonia to progress unchecked. The crowded conditions, poor sanitation, and inadequate medical supplies compounded the danger, turning the hospital into a breeding ground for further illness. For many, including Samuel, the line between care and neglect was painfully thin, and survival depended on endurance and the occasional mercy of circumstance. In the midst of this, soldiers clung to the smallest comforts, a kind word from a surgeon, the touch of a fellow patient, a brief respite from pain, holding on to hope, even as the world around them seemed consumed by suffering. Letters were dictated to those too weak to write, final messages that carried a mixture of love, regret, and sometimes fear. The hospital was not only a place of physical healing, but a crucible of emotional endurance, where the realities of war's toll were laid bare. The surgeons themselves were often young men who had been rapidly thrust into their roles, learning through necessity as much as through training. Their hands moved with both urgency and care, attempting to staunch bleeding, prevent infection, and patch up what the battlefield had torn apart. The lack of antibiotics and modern sterilization meant that many patients faced grim prospects, and the surgeons' grim expressions often betrayed the heavy burden of decisions made under pressure. Each life saved was a small victory against overwhelming odds. Beyond the tents, the camp carried on with its routines, but the shadow of the hospital loomed large in the minds of the soldiers. The stories of those who did not return from the surgeon's tent were shared quietly, a reminder of the fragility of life amid the hardship. The presence of the hospital brought both comfort and dread, a place where hope and despair walked hand in hand. The resilience of the men who endured these conditions was a testament to their strength and determination, a vital part of the human story, woven through the broader tapestry of the war. The hospital's chaos and grimness were inseparable from the larger narrative of the soldiers' experience, revealing the often unseen costs of battle. The bravery displayed on the front lines was mirrored by the courage needed to face pain, illness, and the uncertainty of recovery. Each day in the hospital was a fight, not against an enemy in uniform, but against the injuries and diseases that threatened to claim lives long after the guns had fallen silent. In this harsh environment, small acts of kindness took on immense meaning. Fellow soldiers shared whatever meager comforts they could. Nurses offered soothing words and gentle hands, and surgeons labored tirelessly despite the odds. These moments of humanity stood in stark contrast to the brutality of the battlefield, reminding all involved that beneath the uniform was a person, grappling with fear, hope, and the will to survive. As night fell over the hospital tents, the sounds of pain and care continued unabated. The flickering light of lanterns cast long shadows over rows of cots, each occupied by men whose lives hung in the balance. For those inside, the fight was far from over. It had simply changed form. The field hospital was a place where the war's true cost was measured, where the resilience of the human spirit was tested in the face of unimaginable hardship, and where the bonds forged in blood extended into the quiet moments between life and death. In the midst of relentless marching, bitter cold nights, and the ever-present shadow of battle, soldiers found solace in the simple yet profound act of writing letters home. These letters were more than just words on paper. They were lifelines, connecting men caught in the chaos of war with the families and loved ones they longed for. For many, putting pen to paper became a ritual that helped maintain their morale, a way to grasp at fragments of normalcy amid the turmoil. The act of writing offered a rare moment of peace, a pause from the relentless grind of soldiering and the gnawing fear that tomorrow might bring wounds or death. The campfires flickered as men gathered in small groups, their faces illuminated by the soft glow of lanterns or moonlight, writing carefully or hastily as their emotions dictated. Letters were often written in the quiet hours, when the rest of the camp was settling into uneasy sleep and the soldier's mind could wander homeward. In these moments, the harsh sounds of war, distant gunfire, barking orders, the creak of tents faded into the background, replaced by thoughts of home, family, and the hope that this nightmare would one day end. Samuel, despite his worsening illness, insisted on writing whenever he could, clutching the worn pencil and fragile paper with a determination that defied his weakening body. His letters spoke not only of his experiences, but also of the small, everyday details that kept him tethered to life beyond the battlefield. He wrote of the simple joys his family shared, like his sister losing her first tooth, or a recent letter from home that brought news of neighbors and friends. These seemingly trivial details held immense power, a reminder that life continued beyond the mud, blood, and fear. Other soldiers echoed this sentiment, weaving stories of home into their letters to lift their spirits and those of their recipients. They shared hopes for the future, reassurances that they were still standing despite hardships, and even jokes or debates that had arisen around the campfire. Letters became a way to preserve identity and humanity, a counterpoint to the dehumanizing aspects of war. In these exchanges, soldiers revealed their vulnerabilities, their fears of death, loneliness, and the unknown, while also displaying remarkable resilience and courage. Writing letters was not without its challenges. Paper and ink were often in short supply, and the demands of duty frequently interrupted these moments of calm. Many men wrote with trembling hands, hurried to finish before orders came to march or fight, or paused frequently as fatigue or illness took hold. Still, the letters were carefully folded and tucked into pockets or knapsacks, carried through the chaos with the hope that they would reach their destination and bring comfort to waiting families. Mail delivery was a lifeline, eagerly awaited by both soldiers and those back home. The arrival of letters and newspapers from distant places momentarily bridged the vast gulf between the front lines and civilian life. Men devoured news of battles, political developments, and even gossip, clinging to these pieces of the wider world that reminded them they were part of something bigger than themselves. Conversely, their letters carried pieces of the battlefield back to loved ones, offering glimpses into the soldiers' lives, both the horrors and the moments of humanity. The emotional weight of these letters was immense. For some, a letter was a final message, a testament of love and farewell, written with the knowledge that they might never return. For others, letters were a source of strength, reminders that they were not forgotten, and that their sacrifices mattered. Writing became a quiet act of defiance against the despair and uncertainty that war bred, a way to assert control in a world gone mad. In moments of reflection, soldiers often read and reread letters from home, drawing comfort from the familiar handwriting and the sentiments expressed. The letters offered a psychological refuge, a mental retreat to a place where laughter, warmth, and safety still existed. This connection to home helped sustain many through the darkest days, grounding them when fear threatened to overwhelm and the horrors of combat pressed too close. The act of letter writing also fostered bonds within the regiment. Soldiers exchanged letters, shared words of encouragement, and helped one another find the right words when hope seemed scarce. These shared stories became part of the collective memory, strengthening camaraderie and reminding men that, despite the brutal conditions, they were not alone. Letters carried the voices of absent friends, bridging distances and knitting a community together across miles and battle lines. Beyond the personal, letters contributed to the historical record, providing future generations with intimate glimpses into the lives of those who fought. Through these writings, the human face of war emerges, its fears, hopes, and daily struggles rendered in candid detail. The letters reveal that behind the smoke and gunfire were men who dreamed of peace, who cherished family, and who grappled with the immense weight of their experiences. In the quiet moments between marches and battles, the ritual of writing letters was a beacon of humanity in a world consumed by conflict. It sustained the spirits of soldiers like Samuel and countless others, reminding them that even amidst war's destruction, love and hope could endure. These letters, carried across great distances, linked hearts and homes, forming an unbreakable thread that connected the battlefield to the hearth. In sharing their stories, fears, and moments of normalcy, the soldiers preserved not only their own sanity, but the very essence of what they fought to protect. As darkness settled over the camp, the rhythm of the soldiers' lives shifted into a delicate balance between rest and vigilance, a cycle that defined their nights and shaped their very survival. The quiet that descended was never truly silent. It was punctuated by the occasional rustle of tents, the muted whispers of comrades, and the distant sounds of nocturnal wildlife. Under the vast canopy of stars, the soldiers adapted to a new routine, one where moments of sleep were stolen between watches, and alertness had to be maintained despite exhaustion and the ever-present threat of attack. Night watches were a grim necessity, an unyielding obligation that fell on every man at some point. The regiment divided its soldiers into shifts, ensuring that while some rested, others kept a vigilant eye on the surrounding darkness. Those on guard duty moved stealthily among the tents and campfires, their senses heightened as they scanned the shadows for signs of enemy. His movement, the weight of responsibility hung heavy on their shoulders. A single missed sound or unnoticed movement could mean disaster not only for themselves but for the entire company. This constant pressure forged a unique tension, where fear mingled with determination and an almost mechanical focus that allowed men to endure even when fatigue threatened to overwhelm them. The soldiers learned quickly that vigilance could not be intermittent. Even in the deepest hours of the night, when the body begged for rest, the mind had to remain sharp. The crack of a twig, the softest footfall, or an unusual whisper could trigger a cascade of alertness, the heart pounding as the soldier prepared to meet whatever danger lurked just beyond the firelight. Many recounted how, in these quiet hours, the imagination could become both friend and foe, conjuring phantom enemies or distant battle cries, yet also sharpening instincts honed by months of hardship. For those off watch, sleep was precious, but often elusive. The hard ground or thin blankets offered little comfort, and the constant noise of camp-shifting bodies, whispered conversations, the clinking of gear made deep rest difficult. Soldiers found themselves waking repeatedly, half dreaming yet aware, the stress of the day lingering in their muscles and minds. Despite this, the camaraderie of the camp provided moments of warmth and humanity. Men shared stories by the dying embers of campfires, exchanged quiet jokes to lighten the heavy mood, and found strength in their shared experience. These small acts of connection were vital, bridging the long hours of darkness with bonds of friendship and mutual support. The rotation of rest and watch duty created a grueling cycle that tested physical endurance and mental resilience. Days were consumed by marching, drilling, and fighting, while nights demanded constant alertness punctuated by fleeting rest. Soldiers quickly adapted to this exhausting rhythm, learning to survive on broken sleep and sudden bursts of adrenaline. This harsh lifestyle shaped the very fabric of the regiment, fostering a hardened, focused group, capable of meeting the unpredictable demands of war. Throughout the night, the camp remained alive with activity. Orderlies tended to the sick and wounded, nurses moved quietly among the tents, offering care and comfort, and officers conducted inspections or issued whispered orders. The contrast between the relative calm of the camp and the violent chaos of the battlefield was stark, yet the two were inseparable parts of the soldier's experience. The night watch was both a shield and a sentinel, protecting the regiment as it rested and readying it for the challenges of the coming day. For many soldiers, the long nights became a time of reflection and introspection. Away from the immediacy of combat, thoughts turned inward, pondering the meaning of the war, the fate of loved ones far away, and the uncertain future ahead. Some found solace in writing letters by candlelight, Others prayed silently, or stared up at the stars seeking answers or comfort. These moments of quiet amid danger revealed the deep humanity beneath the uniform, the fears and hopes that bound the men together. The experience of night watches also forged lessons in trust and teamwork. Soldiers depended on each other, not only for physical safety, but for emotional support during these vulnerable hours. A shared glance or whispered reassurance was enough to bolster morale and dispel creeping fears. The bonds formed under the cover of darkness often proved as strong as those forged in battle, a testament to the resilience and spirit of the regiment. Despite the hardships, the discipline of night watches ensured the regiment remained ready. When dawn approached, the soldiers on watch returned to rest, their bodies aching but their minds alert to the new day's demands. The camp stirred with renewed energy, tent flaps flapping open, the clatter of preparations for the march, and the familiar sounds of men greeting one another. The cycle of war continued, each night's vigilance laying the foundation for the survival and effectiveness of the regiment. In the grand narrative of the Civil War soldiers' experience, the nights were as significant as the battles themselves. They were a testament to endurance, courage, and the quiet strength required to face uncertainty and danger, not only in the heat of combat, but in the stillness that followed. Night watches and camp life were not merely routines, but crucibles, where character was tested and forged, shaping the men who carried the burdens of war and the hopes of a nation. The life of a Civil War soldier was far from the romanticized tales of glory and heroism often told in history books or movies. Behind every battle cry and flag-waving moment lay a harsh and unforgiving reality that profoundly affected the men who fought. The relentless physical strain, constant exposure to danger, and mental torment formed an experience that tested not only their bodies, but also their spirits in ways few outside the trenches could truly understand. Every march left soldiers battered and exhausted, their feet raw and bodies aching beneath the weight of heavy equipment and the unyielding demands of duty. The endless cycle of setting up camp, maintaining defensive positions, and enduring insufficient food and sleep wore down even the strongest men. Disease and injury, often unseen enemies, claim more lives than the battlefield itself, and medical care was frequently inadequate, leaving many to suffer in silence or desperation. Yet perhaps the most profound effect was on the mind and heart. The soldiers grappled with overwhelming fear, the trauma of combat, and the pain of being separated from loved ones. Homesickness was a constant companion, as letters home revealed a fragile thread connecting them to a world untouched by war. Moments of brief respite, whether writing letters, sharing stories by the campfire, or simply stealing a few hours of rest during night watches, became lifelines that helped sustain their morale. The brutal reality of battle was a far cry from the drills and training that prepared them. The first volleys, the chaos of retreat, the sight of fallen comrades. These experiences left indelible marks on their souls. The discipline required to survive was immense, not just in maintaining formations and following orders, but in managing the flood of emotions that came with facing death and destruction day after day. For many, the war was not just a physical struggle, but a profound psychological ordeal that would haunt them long after the fighting ended. Field hospitals, with their grim chaos and limited resources, stood as stark reminders of war's cost. The surgeons and nurses worked tirelessly, yet the threat of infection and disease meant that survival was never guaranteed. Soldiers like Samuel, battling pneumonia amid the din of gunshot wounds and amputations, embodied the cruel intersection of human fragility and wartime hardship. Despite these hardships, the camaraderie formed between soldiers created bonds that transcended the suffering. Shared stories, mutual support during night watches, and the simple act of writing letters home underscored the resilience and humanity that endured even in the darkest times. These men were not just fighters. They were sons, brothers, and fathers, holding on to hope amidst despair. As we look back on the experiences of Civil War soldiers, it is crucial to remember the complexity and depth of their reality. Their stories remind us that war is not just a series of battles, but a human experience filled with pain, sacrifice, and enduring strength. Understanding this helps us honor their memory with the respect and empathy they deserve, beyond the glorified narratives. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey into the daily life of a Civil War soldier. If you found this story meaningful, please consider liking the video and subscribing to the channel for more historical insights and stories that bring the past to life. Your support helps keep these important stories alive and accessible. Wishing you all a peaceful night. May your dreams be calm and may you rest well. Good night. Be calm and may you rest well.